Of course, the whole country has been watching the nomination process for Brett Kavanaugh, who Donald Trump has named to the Supreme Court. His nomination is being considered now in the Senate. And my next guest is a friend of mine, and she's been on the program before. She wrote a piece. She used to serve on the Senate Judiciary Committee as a staffer, as counsel, and she wrote a piece that I think may have or may yet change history. The piece was for Salon. I wrote some of the stolen memos that Brett Kavanaugh lied to the Senate about. That's the headline Slate gave it. He should be impeached, not elevated, was the subhead. Lisa Graves is the author. She makes her case very carefully and very articulately, and citing that essay, Senator Dianne Feinstein, is suggesting that his lack of honesty in previous questioning, as described by Lisa Graves, seems to make him unfit to serve on the Supreme Court, which certainly seemed to be Lisa's case. So without any further ado, Lisa Graves, thanks for coming on. Oh, I should also say Lisa is the co-founder and co-director of Documented Investigations, and she joins us now. Lisa, thanks for coming back on the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And this has been exciting to watch. Hey, that's my friend who wrote that piece. Hey, that's my friend on Rachel Maddow. Hey, that's my friend that Dianne Feinstein is quoting. And first of all, before we go into the Brett Kavanaugh thing, just briefly, so folks know, what does Documented Investigations do?
Sure. We're a small watchdog group that focuses on how corporations are trying to distort our democracy and policies on our economy and our environment. We look at corporations that play a big role in politics, elections, and policy, and the sort of front groups that they work through, and their tactics of trying to basically change the rules to benefit them in ways that don't help most people.
So, okay, and documented.org, is that what's the website?
Documentedinvestigations.org.
Documented Investigations.
Yep.
Okay, so first of all, you've gotten a lot of attention for this piece in Slate. You say he should be the better question is not whether he should be confirmed, but whether he should be impeached from the federal judiciary, which of course is where he now sits. So I know you've repeated this in many places already, but just briefly, your argument there.
Well, Brett Kavanaugh is someone who's a judge. He's a judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, and he obtained that judgeship after testifying before Congress, both in 2004 and 2006, about his history, his role in different things that were very current at the time, and he was asked a lot of questions about some matters that were extremely controversial, including matters involving which of the George W. Bush nominees he worked on, but also more than 100 questions about a major theft of Senate files by a Senate staffer, a Republican who was leading the work for Senator Bill Frist to try to force those nominees through the Senate and onto the bench. And I think that it's clear in the instances that we have, there's an incomplete record because the White House and the Kavanaugh team have basically been, or Kavanaugh's allies have been trying to hide literally millions of records from the American people, have tried to cloak more than 100,000 pages with just some sort of blanket constitutional privilege or something. But in the small portion of documents that were released, within that there are example after example of Kavanaugh having said things that are now contradicted by evidence from the time. And so I think it's a very serious matter. It's a very serious matter, not just because it's under testimony under oath to the United States Senate, in connection with securing a lifetime job as a judge. It's also a serious matter because he has been put forward by Donald Trump to be the next justice of the Supreme Court. He's 52 years old, and if he is confirmed, he could serve for decades. And I think his record demonstrates that he, cannot be entrusted with such a position of great trust. He has his answers have been deceptive, and I think he lied under oath repeatedly, as I said in my article for Slate.
Yeah, and you're an attorney, so I know you don't say that lightly. You say, and as you point out in your piece, Elise Graves, you say receiving those memos and letters alone, these stolen memos and letters, is not an impeachable offense. But, for example, Senator Hatch in 2004 asked him directly, did he receive, quote, any documents that appeared to you to have been drafted or prepared by Democratic staff members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, end quote, like you, for example? And he responded unequivocally no, but then one of the subject lines to the emails he's received, and correct me if I'm wrong about any of this, was said not for distribution. Another said spying, quote unquote. Another said, quote, Senator Leahy's staff, and you worked for Senator Leahy, had distributed a confidential letter to Dem counsel, all of which suggests you'd have to be utterly oblivious not to conclude that he was lying when he said he hadn't received anything that appeared to be drafted by Democratic staff members. Is that more or less accurate?
Well, yes, and I think, when you think of the sort of image, the case that the administration and its allies in the Senate are putting forward is that he's this brilliant man, that he's a religious man, and that he's so insightful or capable. But when you look at what actually happened here, he was receiving, at least from I'm sure there's many more documents that are similar to this that they're trying to cloak. But the document we see, he's receiving significant confidential information from Democratic staffers by way of Manuel Miranda, the person who was named as the culprit by the Republican Senate Sergeant at Arms for the theft of these documents. And Kavanaugh, in that period before he was testifying, had received a number of emails providing him with talking points that were clearly Democratic talking points that we would never have provided to him or to Miranda, given the fights over these nominees. He was provided reference to these confidential letter and the contents of that letter. Key contents, including the identity of the whistleblower, was provided to him, stuff that never would have been provided to our opponents in the fights over those nominations. And instance after instance of things where even if he might somehow say, despite his intelligence, that he had no idea that this was information from Democrats, when it was described as information from Democrats or untoward in any way, certainly after the fact, he would have to look back and think that he likely received a substantial amount of information from Manuel Miranda that had been stolen from the Senate itself, from the United States Senate server. And so I think that the timing there is significant. These battles had occurred the year before his hearing, these battles on these nominees. They've been actually going on from 2002 to 2003 into 2004. The theft was, we discovered the theft in November of 2003. There was a 4-month investigation, including a forensic analysis of the Senate servers. Now, Manuel Miranda was no longer on the Senate server at that time. He'd been working for Bill Frist, for the majority leader. So, but the Senate investigators looked at the number of documents that were stolen. There were more than 4,000 documents that were stolen. They issued a report in March of 2004 condemning the theft and describing crimes that could be charged for potential referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office, to the Justice Department, the Bush Justice Department. And the very next month, Brett Kavanaugh's hearing was held, and he said what you said. He denied he had any knowledge of it, that he had any idea that he'd been receiving these memos. And then it turns out memos, letters, files, documents of any kind, they were clearly referenced. Clearly, in some cases, the contents were provided to him. And I think he lied. And I think that he's unfit to serve not only as a U.S. Supreme Court justice, but as a judge on any court.
See,
that's my opinion.
See, Lisa Graves, here's my only problem, and it's not really a problem, but here's my only problem with the case you make in Slate and the case you make here and the case you made elsewhere, is that it should be so obvious that he's a liar, that he is unscrupulous, unethical, and mendacious, that, you know, I know you do have to make the case, but I'm thinking, like, why do we even have to make the case? This guy gets an email chain that says spying. He gets something that says confidential letter. He gets something that says, you know, this is what they're... I mean, the Republicans are trying to, in my opinion, to blow smoke in everybody's face by saying, oh, well, he didn't mean this, he didn't mean that. Any idiot knows that he knew what they were, especially after all this became public, which is why the questions were being asked in 2004 or whenever. And it's almost an insult to the intelligence, in my opinion, to have to even make the case. It seems obvious.
Well, that's right. And that was the value of the information, was that it was that it was not public, that it wasn't known, and that they were, Manny Miranda was stealing it from us and providing it to him to help them in the most heated battles of that Congress, which were over these nominees. And so it just defies logic and all imagination that he would assert that he had no idea that he was getting secret information from Democratic counsels. And certainly after the fact, it's absurd for him to suggest that. And then in the hearing last week, he actually sort of shifted gears and tried to assert that it was normal because that's the way Congress works, the coin of the realm, and you often get information about the questions or concerns a member has. That is absurd. In this instance, we were in, a pitched battle, heated fights in which every Democratic senator on that Judiciary Committee was united in trying to protect the courts from some of these extreme Bush nominees. And for him to say that was just the regular order of things is contrary to the actual fact, as the staffers knew, as the White House knew, as they attacked us relentlessly, and as the press who was reporting on these battles documented over and over and over again. And so that's just the latest lie, although I understand from the written answers that were submitted last night, there may be, more ways in which he's continuing to conceal or refusing to be honest and forthright about his role, what he knew and when he knew it.
And just to be clear for our listeners, we record on Thursdays but broadcast on Saturday and Monday. So by last night, we mean Wednesday. Oh. You know who I've really lost? I didn't think I had a scintilla of respect left for any Republicans, to be honest. But, apparently I did, because I lost it in regards to, and I have to say this, in regards to Senator Grassley and some of the other Republicans on the committee, because I thought at least there was some element of something approximating integrity in there somewhere. But to me, it seems like this whole thing is a charade that says, we know, if you work in Washington, D.C., you know he's lying. If you work on the Hill, you know he's lying. If you're in the senior leadership or staff position, a Democrat or Republican, you know he's lying. If you were around in 2004, you know he's lying. But they all know it, and they all know that should make him morally unfit to be a Supreme Court justice, but they're counting on the public not knowing what everybody here knows, and that, to me, makes me lose all respect for all of them. Am I being unfair?
Well, you're certainly entitled to your opinion, Richard. I think that I'm astonished by the willingness of this majority to break and bend rules on a matter that's of such grave seriousness. This isn't a piece of legislation where if you get it wrong, you have some provision that's incorrect, you can fix it next year with a majority vote to correct, an error that was made in crafting a law. This is a lifetime appointment to the highest court in the country. This is no small matter, and in many respects, barring impeachment or a health issue or something, it's permanent. It's for the entire life of that person who's confirmed, and for many of your listeners, probably including myself, it's for the entire probably rest of my life. So it's a very serious matter. Who is confirmed to this highest court in our land? And the Senate should take all the time it needs to really understand whether the person who's being given such an extraordinary role in our country is someone who's trustworthy. And I think the record shows that he's not. And I can only believe that there's so much more that would reveal the even greater extent of his deceit, that they are determined to try to push this through as quickly and as recklessly as possible by, trying to force it under these circumstances. The vacancy was just announced only a couple of months ago. They let Merrick Garland's nomination pen for more than 400 days. They weren't concerned about a 4-4 divide on the U.S. Supreme Court or the capacity of the court to do its business and issue majority rulings, given the fact that it was sort of divided politically 4-4 or, ideologically 4-4. They were in no hurry to act at all. And suddenly, in this instance, you have this extremely rapid process that they've put in place unilaterally to try to ram him through, to install him on the Supreme Court, despite the cloud that hangs over him based on his own statements and how they're contradicted by the record that has emerged. And so I'm extremely disappointed that there is this rush. It's unnecessary. It's unprecedented under the circumstances. It's unwise. And it's actually pretty outrageous. So, I think it's really, and it's an abdication, quite frankly, of the Senate's responsibilities. And I take quite seriously the Senate's responsibilities regarding advice and consent. I think those are solemn duties that they're given by our Constitution of the United States, and they should be taking whatever time is necessary to get to the bottom of this man's record, to examine fully what his record really is, what he really did versus what he said he did, because he's been caught over and over lying to the Senate and to the American people.
Well, I think that's so well said, Lisa Graves, that I have nothing to add to it except, if you're outraged, imagine how I feel, because you're much more thoughtful and judicious than I am. So Lisa Graves, former counsel for the Senate Judiciary Committee, Democrats, and co-founder and co-director of Documented Investigations, thanks so much for your great work on this issue, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. I appreciate it. Thanks.